Good evening, and I have the easy part because I have a long list of questions, and if I go past my first one, I feel I'll fail, so I'm going to do a very good job of calling on you. The Adidas story was interesting because you may have read in the paper that just a day or two ago, Lego, after 5 years of investing in a recyclable brick that all our kids played with, has abandoned it and gone back to the traditional brick. So it's not easy. Clarke, thank you very much for coming to Austin. He reminded Marlon and myself that the last time he was on 6th Street, he was not wearing a blazer, so we'll just imagine what he's going to be doing later this evening. But you can't be in Austin without thinking about politics, and your opening comments about we're not going to call this ESG, we're going to call this sustainability, is very true here. It's known, and some of you are in the political world here, you know that if you mention ESG at the State House, it gets thrown out. It is a non-viable concept if you want to get anything done. And yet, thanks to some paperwork I have from this great organization called Texas 2036, I'm going to give you a few statistics as to how much we as a state are doing in this area. Over $1 billion invested in water infrastructure. Another $1 billion in state parks. Now, how do you justify state parks and sustainability? How do you get it past economic development is the code word they will use. They determined that when you put state parks in rural areas around the state, it drives tourism, it drives revenues, it drives economic development. We are a state, sadly, that is enormously subject to extreme weather conditions. We've seen it this summer. We'll see it in the fall with hurricanes. We'll see it throughout the year with freezes and so forth, and a huge amount has been put into it. These are all examples that if you use the right terminology, you can get stuff done even in Texas. So I will turn to you, Clarke, and ask the first question, because we know it's good policy, whether it's on the corporate level or on the political level. How do we depoliticize the conversation to the point where we can all agree that these are investments that need to be made for the betterment of society?
Yeah, I mean, listen, investors and others, maybe we turn off one mic, investors respond to success. And this will largely, and I'll come back to it, largely fall on the private sector to show that you can have a long-term viable strategy and operations and success and keep good employees, all the things we talked about at the beginning. When you're slowly but surely bringing in all these aspects to it. The second thing I'd say about politics, and again, on either side of the aisle in this comment, the Europeans are freaked out about the IRA bill bringing all these European companies to the southeast, southwest to put plants and drive R&D because of the tax subsidies from the United States. And I mean, you go, and I've spoken in London, Zurich, Copenhagen, Milan, Madrid. Usually the second or third question is, what do you think Europe should do to attract investment from America here, because we're losing it from here to America? So I think the private sector drives this ultimately. And I think institutional investors, some in particular, have learned that preaching at the board is not a successful approach to investing in the board. And I think they've obviously pulled back. So, and then I think where you can create public-private partnerships like the methanol and the green hydrogen, which is both of those cities, Oslo and Singapore, have the government and the private sector working together. So I think it's private sector led. It can be incentives, and then it's public-private partnerships.
I want to ask one more question, then we're going to turn it to this group. It's easy to point to companies that make sneakers and other types of consumer products and define them as sustainable. You've been on the board and CEO of a service company. How does that change, and what directives did your board give you with respect to our board to launching a more sustainable company?
Yeah, so what service businesses, we are building centric and serving our clients and tutorials, and we're travel heavy. And so I think you quickly make what everyone's doing is going to LED gold buildings, and you've got to look at your footprint. I was saying to somebody earlier that I talked to Allison Bailey, who's one of the senior people at BCG, and both of us have seen, I don't know what you all have seen, in the last 6 months or so, sometime this year, the switch flipped and everybody wants to see us in person. It's like 2020 never happened. And they want to see us in LA and San Antonio and Bermuda for an hour. And they expect us to be there, and the bankers and the lawyers, consultants, et cetera. So I think we have to hold a line about what we think is appropriate to do. But I think the amount of water, power, and the mindset as a service business. And part of what we're doing is, obviously, we probably recruited, 350 chief sustainability officers in the last couple of years, is our obligation to give good advice around leadership as well.
All right, so we're going to open up to questions. Please state your name and whatever board affiliations you may have so everyone gets to know you and meet you. Will you raise your hand? I thought I saw you raising. Yeah.
I'm not sure if I raised my hand, but something caught my attention, so I will mention. So my son had started the guar business because one of the things that petroleum industry also uses guar, so it caught my attention.
Okay, excuse me, hold one second. Can we have a mic that might work better in the audience, because I think
I'll turn mine off.
It won't conflict, yeah. Thank you.
So the guar business, that's just aside because it just caught my attention. But I just want to congratulate you for pushing for sustainable leadership thing, because it seems like you're on the edge where it's not clear whether it's profitable always.
Yes.
And yet, if you have the long-term horizon, there is no other option. I think that's the key here in terms of whatever. So, in terms of the governance perspective, pushing sustainability is like a balancing act. It's not always like a clear-cut decision as to whether which requires goes from one industry to another, and you have to do that part always in terms of where do we draw the line, in terms of how much do you push versus where do you stop.
Yeah, I agree 100%, and I think we'll...
Can you just slightly repeat the question?
Yeah. So what's the balance? Let's still wait at the mics. Yeah. We can yell. What's the balancing act of how hard do you push, where you find profits, where you might find losses, or where you might lose support because you push too hard, or you might lose support because you don't push hard enough? And listen, I think there will be, in the next, pick your framework, 5 to 10 years, there'll be more losses than profits with the CapEx we're putting into any number of these things. And I don't just mean the oil business. I mean, making this chair, whatever it might be, making the cocktails. So the question is, I think if one has authentically is committed, you can bring your company, your suppliers along with you and say, and the question I usually get is, how do I start? How do I get going? I think people are trying to solve all the problems, like Atlas carrying the boulder up the hill. You got to start with just one thing and measure it. Now, measurement's a problem because there's like 19 different measurement systems that are out there, from the Big Four to Davos to the different industries. Your company can pick the measurement, or the board picks the measurement, and stick with it for 2 to 3 years, or 2 measurements. So I think the balance is what scares people the most. And I think that's the hardest part. But there are also, again, back to spontaneity, there's a great story just beyond the Madrid airport is a huge industrial section that none of us have ever seen. It's not the prettiest part of Spain. And there is the largest San Miguel beer brewery there. They're working hard to reduce water use. It takes 4.2 liters of water to make a liter of beer. It's crazy. Across the street from them is a glass manufacturer called Veralia. They probably make these. It's tableware. It's kind of cheap glass at scale. 45 weeks a year, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, they're making glass. Guess what? It takes 1,000 degrees of heat to make glass at scale. So, true story, 3.5 years ago, a young female engineer is leaving the brewery who's working on the water solutions. She's going to her car and she looks over at the glass manufacturer and she sees the huge smokestacks, 2 smokestacks. And she says, what if we took all that heat that's going up the smokestack and we piped it underground and we powered the brewery? If we save all that money and energy, I'd get more money to solve the water problem. Well, 3.5 years later, that is exactly what they did. And they've saved a couple of million euros on energy to put into water research, and they're now at 2.8 liters of water per liter of beer.
It's a
mindset.
issue of mindset.
It's a mindset.
If you have the right mindset, you'll find a way out.
Correct.
Great.
Thank
Well,
you.
I'd like to know how she was rewarded.
Ah,
Well, in that case, I would say she was rewarded, particularly the Scandinavian companies who are tying all this to compensation, much more so than the American companies are. So I would give it a pretty good chance she was well rewarded for that, and I think that scares a lot of people because you're putting your tack up to success and progress, and that's multi-year compensation, not just annual compensation. We could go on that one for a whole night.
Hi, I'm Chris Hoskins, and I serve on the Healthcare Realty Board. What are your thoughts on how ISS is grading ESG?
I think it's well, I can't use that language.
Go ahead.
I think it's incredibly flawed and incenting the wrong things. So guess what? We add another woman to your board, then I can emit like 200 more tons of carbon a year by ISS scoring. That is a fact. The way that it's weighted. So I think they haven't thought it through in the sense of a 10-year time horizon of scoring and what's weighted correctly. I think it's crazy.
My only comment back would be shareholders are looking at it,
Oh, 100%. Oh, yeah, I agree.
but they don't understand.
They don't understand.
the philosophy.
Correct.
is that consistent with your views?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Other questions? Yes.
I have a question. My name is Yolanda Baker. I just started. I am a candidate for certification. I'm also the board treasurer of the Autism Society of Texas. But I am also an artificial intelligence software tester. So, Mr. Murphy, I'm curious. In your book, do you mention anything about artificial intelligence and sustainable leadership?
We talk a lot about, not AI, no. Technology unto itself, yes. Because capital and human will cannot make the progress without technology. There's a whole chapter saying, and we don't know what technologies will do what, how quickly, right? And I happen to teach at MIT in the business school in the Sustainable Leadership Program, and they developed a model we won't go into now over the past 10 or 12 years of the various levers you can pull, right? And in some areas where we made a lot of progress, it was not predicted. But technology so accelerated the ability to pull the levers, this is one of the great unknowns. We also can't rely on just the technology emerging. But I think it's massive confidence and hope and dependence that technology would be one of the bigger impacts to get to where some of the things we want to get to.
I am Kristen Otis, and I serve on a couple of sorry.
Yeah,
There we go,
Can you hear me
perfect.
now?
Yeah.
I serve on a couple of manufacturing company boards. I'm curious the links between the 4 factors you identified for sustainable leadership and how, if at all, it's been able to translate back into the Russell Reynolds practice and how you guide your clients.
Yep.
And can you play a role in guiding them to weight those factors more heavily?
Yeah. So we did not pay her for that question. Okay? She gets 2 drinks instead of 1. So the answer is yes, and dramatically faster acceptance in Europe than America. And so one of the well-known luxury conglomerates of the world has gold, silver, leather, chemicals. Like there's a brutal industry around these topics, and they know what they're behind. Have embedded this in their leadership selection process because they're saying we're so far behind, we've got to go deeper in the organization to find them, and they're testing for it to put them into the C-suite roles to ultimately be the leader. Same in the pharmaceutical business, particularly the Swiss, for all the obvious reasons, being in Switzerland. So they have been embedded, and the private equity firms are using it. 3 firms are using it already in America to try and accelerate their progress. But I would say the Fortune 300 is much slower than the European public companies.
Just so it's not an advertisement for you, is there an do you see other search firms trying to pick up on this research and leverage it?
Yeah, so we'd love to be proud that we were first. There's also those followers. But Aegon Zender has really picked up on this as well in the last year or so. So I think it's going to become a fundamental. We looked at digital DNA for a number of years in selecting leaders, right? That's just table stakes now. So I think this will eventually become table stakes. And the investment bankers, the commercial bankers in terms of underwriting green loans and green bonds are really looking at this. And then some of the institutional investors, the governance groups, who do have the capabilities to measure and get to know things because they're so big, are doing this as well, and big time.
Well, remember, these attributes apply to all leaders in the boardroom and elsewhere, right? So if you think about their thought process and so forth, it doesn't just apply to those leaders for sustainability, but really across all decision making. And it has improved our interviewing techniques and our clients' interviewing techniques when looking at new board members.
So we train our people differently now.
Yes.
Do you think there will, at some point...
Your name? Sorry.
Sorry. Mitch Jacobson. I'm just recently left the University of Texas. I was involved in, and I'm still involved in, clean tech, early stage companies. Do you think, and I'm on the board of 2, a public company and a private company, on a number of nonprofit companies, organizations. Do you think at some point in time there will be a standardization of measurement, just like there is in a lot of other industries, of how to measure success in this area? Because there's a lot of different, we talked about it a little bit already, but at some point in time, the industry does come together to collate and then standardize measurements of success in terms of the environment and sustainability.
I do think so, but I think it'll be...
Actually, can I
Yeah.
jump in here?
Yep.
My question is related to this.
Yep.
And I have a very loud voice, so I'm
You're
pretty
good.
sure all of you can hear me. Roddy Chef, on the board of Austin Technology Council. Playing off this question, my question is standardization, one thing. Benchmark is something else. So today, there's no standardization. But with leadership, because it's a long-term initiative, there's always this question of how are we proceeding as opposed to our competitors, so Nike versus Adidas, for example. How does that question get answered in the minds of leadership in terms of a positive reinforcement when you talk?
So we'll unpack a few things there. First is, can leaders feel like they're getting off the back foot and get on the front foot? So that relates to benchmarking and competition. I think you will have standards by industry. I think right now the fact that ISS or some entity, Price Waterhouse says this is sustainability across airlines, chair manufacturers, brewers, and real estate construction is crazy, right? So I think it'll have to be done industry by industry. But I would hope we wouldn't wait for that, right? Because companies have to move faster than waiting for that. But I think it will come. And you look at XML, you look at eventually the software companies years ago said this thing called e-commerce and the internet, we need to have a common code, we need to have a common way to do this, and they did quite quickly. I think the same will emerge here over time.
Even through NIST, which is but it is the standards of from the U.S. government.
Yeah.
Thank you, national standards. So again, hopefully it has reached that point. That is part of what NIST is thinking about.
Yeah. So one of the things Marla mentioned, I'm involved in the Mission Possible Partnership, which is the 7 hardest to abate industries: cement, transportation, shipping, et cetera, where Chad Holliday, who's a Dow, and some of you will remember, CEO of Dow, is the chairman of this, and we're working with the CEOs around the world to come together in the Mission Possible Partnership to share non-competitive approaches to the hardest to abate industries. So if you're really making progress in some area of R&D, share that with your fellow cement manufacturers in Mexico and in Germany and in America or the other industries. And that's the goal of the whole thing. And standardization, not benchmarking, standardization is right at the top and going to the EU and to Washington in particular to try and make progress on that. That's what MPP is all about.
So a couple of other hands here. Yes, Kathleen.
Hi, I'm Kathleen McAllister, mainly serve on energy boards. I completely agree with you on sustainability being the right word, and have worked in Europe and globally for a long time. And the first time I saw a corporate sustainability report, I was like, let's hug and then get back to business. So that was probably like 3 years ago. So I love that you're drawing that to our attention. And I wonder, you touched on it a bit around compensation, but I wonder if there are 2 or 3 things around mindset and culture and just the way European leaders and companies think about this that we can take away quickly. And I'll give you an example. Writing to an event with a friend. I think great chance to chat. My European best friend probably thinks, let's reduce our carbon footprint. I can talk to Kathleen for 5 or 10 minutes if I have to do that.
Right.
So just
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is around the supply chain. Now, different things start for different reasons. The EU trying to be one state, trying to get across the mountains of various European countries to deliver things. So the supply chain mindset of Europe is different than ours for all the reasons we know. So some things are embedded in different reasons. But I think as board members to look at the supplier dynamic of your companies, we tend to think about it as procurement and cost as opposed to how it all arrives and from what sources and from what methods. That they have a mindset about adjusting the supply chain at the root of the whole thing, like the guar bean, okay? Number one. Number two, most of those countries are socialist in nature. So this concept that the young employees are going to have, as opposed to saying I want to work from home, are saying, here's how I want to get involved in tapping the energy culturally. Okay? The DSM cafeteria was the hotbed of ideas across generations. And I didn't talk about it because we're out of time. I think the day of the hierarchical CEO has long been over now. And to us, leadership is not just leading, but creating followership. And in a more, for better or worse, I'm not socialist, but better or worse, as I say, if you don't have a followership, you're taking a walk alone. You're not leading. And so a lot of these companies are more willing to learn as a culture. And I say we learned about IQ and EQ. The determination of a great company is how high is the LQ? Is the CEO willing to say, I don't know anything about AI, so I'm going to learn next to the 34-year-old, which sets a tone like DSM of saying, if we're going to make it, we got to keep learning. So I still think the American companies are on the back foot because of BlackRock or somewhere else. They're saying, prove yourself. You're not good enough. Like, no. What's our aspiration to go forward? And I'm willing to learn next to the 35-year-old to create the innovation or to create a culture that says we want to change. It's getting on the front foot, and it's okay. It's a mindset. The poor bartender's getting lonely back there. But
Gina.
Yeah. Hi, thanks so much for your time. My name is Gina Ortiz-Jones. I'm the former Undersecretary of the Air Force. I did not grow up in the private sector, but I do know something about managing risk, long-term strategic planning, et cetera. And you talked a little bit about kind of how neat it is to be in Austin. I think it's frankly just also neat to be in Texas. when you think about sustainable leadership and you advise CEOs and even board members to kind of think through these things, I welcome your thoughts about how they need to think about the physical place where they are in. Because yes, Austin is great, not as cool as San Antonio, just to be clear. But Texas is home to 1 in 10 kids, right? And so when we think about long-term, the pipeline of talent, not only into the private sector, but also into national security, many of the challenges that we have in our state have ripple effects, long-term significant effects, and young folks are actually looking to CEOs in particular, private sector, to lead on some of these issues. So I'd welcome kind of hearing your thoughts on how do you talk about sustainable leadership in places that to CEOs that are operating in places that have an outsized impact on frankly the rest of the country.
Yeah. I think it's a great question, and you look at the natural birth ground in Scandinavia of many of these sustainable approaches and practices, and H2 green steel, because you can use hydro, is based on the shores of Sweden. So I think it has a big impact on it. Again, with complexity, I don't know necessarily that some CEOs are leveraging their physical community to their advantage per se as they think about some of the other things.
Well, and there was a quote in your book that jumped out at me, and I thought it was really succinctly kind of captured the essence, which is sustainable CEOs are committed to solving the problem without knowing the solution, right? But part of that assumes that you're solving the right problem, or thinking about the problem at the right scale.
Correct.
To, again, the import of, am I thinking about just Travis County, or am I thinking about Texas, or am I thinking about the country?
Right. Yeah. This last question in the back? Yes.
Hi, I'm David Cush. I'm currently on the beach, but I spent 10 years as the CEO of Virgin America and 3 years as the CEO of ServiceCam. And I want to know your opinion on why the orcas are attacking all the yachts.
So, since you asked, that was not a planning question, I just did the Fastnet race, and our boat was attacked in Gibraltar by the orcas. So I watched this happen, had to replace the rudder. We're pretty sure that the mother of one of these pods was either hit by a boat or something happened, and it's her anger in defending her young whales, and now the whales are learning from her that this is a thing to do. Yeah. So our rudder was not broken, though several others were smashed, because we stopped the boat and used everybody on board, started banging on the boat to create lots of noise that reverberates to the water, and we think that's what scared them off before they broke our rudder. But there's a video, the boat's called JAJO, JJO, if you want to see the orcas hitting it and then leaving successfully, whereas the 4 boats in front of us, one sank and the others got smashed.
Great question, though.
Thank you all very much.